My name is Mimi Billing, and I will be moderating this session. I'm a senior reporter at Sifted, based in Stockholm, in the Nordics. And we are not going to be anywhere near the Nordics for this session. We're going to go to across the pond to Canada and the US to discuss how to succeed across the pond. And with me, this session is also in partnership with Invest Alberta. And we love to hear your questions throughout. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom, and we'll try to go through as many questions as we can throughout the session. So let me introduce our panel. We have Rick Christiaanse, Chief Executive Officer at Invest Alberta, an organization that expedites business operations, fosters collaborations, and it goes the extra mile to ensure long-term success for businesses in the region. We have Neeraj Gupta, co-founder of Lawcubator, a SaaS-based platform for organizations to manage legal compliances and HR regulations with headquarters in Canada. And we have Jenny von Podewils, co-founder and co-CEO at the German HR platform Leapsome, which has just opened an office in the US. And hopefully we will also be joined by Saroosh Gull, who is the CEO of Eventcombo, an event as a service platform found in the US. We'll see if he turns up soon, and then he will get more of a proper introduction. But to start off with, obviously, Canada and the US, or the North American continent, is something that many startups are looking at for expansion to. And just in the last few months, we've seen both Northvolt, the gigafactory in Sweden, who's chosen to actually open a factory in Canada instead of the US, which most people thought. And also this big green steel, H2 Green Steel, this other company is also trying to go to Canada now. So obviously Canada has something that these kind of big tech companies are interested in. So if I start with you, Rick, I mean, what is the kind of the pull of Canada in comparison to the US, you think?
We like the US. Big Brother is good to us, so I'm not gonna say too many bad things about them, but there are some really distinct advantages that we have in Canada. The number one is talent. We have the ability to bring talent in through an immigration policy that is much more flexible than what the US is offering. We are able to bring high-tech talent in for specific industries, for specific companies. We have some concierge services that we offer that allow people to bring people in as little as 6 weeks, versus the US, which with the H-1B1 visa debacle has a fair amount of issues that we recognize. Secondly, we provide market access in ways that not many other countries can. Canada has free trade agreements with 51 countries around the world. So a lot of companies from Europe locate themselves here and then use our foundation to jump into Asia and also to go into the US or Mexico or anywhere else in the Americas. So market access, which of course is critical for selling your product, also incredibly important. The third thing is that we get things done. A lot of the companies that come to Europe or that come to the West, especially out of Japan and Korea and other Asian places, are concerned with the speed with which we can help them get started. So, for example, Amazon built a huge facility here and needed some leveling permits, something that usually takes 6 months to 2 years anywhere in Europe. And we got those permits done for them in 7 days. So that cost us time is money. And so we're able to move things forward. So those are some of the main drivers around talent, around access to markets, and around getting things done that allow us to bring more people into the market more quickly and achieve some of the successes you referenced a minute ago.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Rick. And I think that Saroosh is about to join us now. We'll see. We wait until we have a picture of him. And there we go. Hi, Saroosh. Welcome to the Sifted Talks.
Hello, Mimi. How are you?
Well, good, thanks. Good. We just started, so you haven't missed that much. Just about all the pros about Canada. We're going to get into more detail later.
Wonderful.
And Saroosh, Eventcombo obviously is a company that was founded in the US, but just recently, like this summer, you moved your headquarters to Canada. I mean, why did you do that?
Sure. First of all, Mimi, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here with wonderful company. Mimi, there's, when you look at relocation, you look at primarily all the, key factors such as access to talent, ecosystem development, real estate costs on the corporate side. And then we're talking about relocation of family, and from a personal perspective, you look at quality of life, you look at, again, ecosystem, education for your children, and so forth. And when we were looking at a headquarters, when we were prospecting, Calgary checked off all the boxes for us. Alberta checked off all the boxes for us, both on the corporate side, our criteria, as well as for me personally. And so those are the dynamics. And what we really have here is a ecosystem. Rick may disagree, but I think this ecosystem is still maturing, and that's a significant advantage for a scale up like us, where we want to grow with a growing ecosystem versus some already, I would say, mature ecosystems. East Coast, West Coast, in either country, United States or Canada, and even abroad. So Alberta has these advantages that any growing ecosystem would bring with it, and that's private support, that's public support, and again, the criteria, the checklist kind of satisfies itself with all of these dynamics. The last thing I'll point out, Mimi, is that as a scale up, we're very ambitious, we're very aggressive with our expansion plans, and Alberta is also. And when you have that type of synergy between a province like Alberta, that's, I think, also in many ways a scale up, and it's transitioning. And then you have a scale up like us. It's really a match made in heaven, right? So those are some of the dynamics we looked at, and we're pretty satisfied by what we've observed and now being here as well. Yeah.
I'm soon going to go over to you, Jenny, but I just want to hear from Neeraj as well, because I believe that Lawcubator was actually founded in India from the beginning, right? But you have also like a headquarters in Canada. I mean, is there the same kind of reasoning behind Lawcubator as Eventcombo, you would say, Neeraj, or?
So I've lived across the globe, and we keep looking into. In addition to what Rick and Saroosh mentioned, there are three important aspects for companies like us: innovation, technology, and infrastructure. These are the three other aspects, and in addition to what Rick and Saroosh mentioned. So we keep looking into some places where that there's a technology expertise and innovation expertise, and Alberta has been there because of oil and gas. There has been a lot of technology expertise, be it IoT or AI or machine learning, believe me or not, and innovation as well. Canada primarily has been among top 10 most innovative countries in the world. And the infrastructure, you need the proper infrastructure, not just the physical infrastructure, but compute infrastructure and different kind of hardware and software infrastructure. It's already been there. So that's why it became very important for us that the perfect ecosystem where we could come in and make like Alberta our headquarters, and then we flip the entire model. So we are growing across the globe, and we are trying to expand it while we are headquartered in Canada, in Alberta. And I'm also advisor to Invest Alberta. So we keep looking into the similar kind of a pattern from the companies which are coming from Asia and Europe.
So just to clarify something, do you actually need to move your headquarters to Alberta to actually get all that kind of things going, or can you just open an office in Canada? Would that be the same, or would that be completely different rules then?
It will be the same. There's no necessity to move your headquarters to Alberta if you don't want to. A lot of companies do come in when they are doing their technology center or support center or business center as well, in addition to wherever they are headquartered. But for a lot of scale-ups and large organizations, it's a matter of also not just moving or setting up a business center, but also if you're headquartering in Canada, you get a lot of other perks and the ease to do business, right? And because if I'm a scale up, I would want to get acquired at some point of time, right? And if you are a Canadian company and Canada-based company and headquartered in Canada, it becomes easy for a lot of other organizations to kind of interact with you and acquire you. So that's the reason why a lot of companies will find that they're shifting here, along with the co-founders as well, like Saroosh and his entire management team shifted over here. So that's exciting part of it as well.
And Jenny, you haven't picked Canada, you picked the US for your expansion and opened an office in New York only for a few months ago, right? So How has that worked out?
Yeah, so I mentioned this briefly when we had the chat before we started the call. We actually were planning to open our North American operation in 2020, and then COVID hit. So we actually had to be creative and build our first North America-oriented sales and success team out of Europe, with just slightly different working hours. So that was sort of like our creative way to bridge the COVID times. And then we finally opened our North American office last summer. And we have about 40-50 people on the ground in North America now, mainly across the go-to-market functions. Our research and development, our product and engineers stay that hub stays in Germany. And for us, we actually took a very intentional approach to really review ultimately what the right hub for us is within North America, and assessed quite a different locations based on quite a few of the criteria that have already been mentioned. Talent and ecosystem was very sort of like top for us. The second one was proximity to customers. And actually the third one that maybe wasn't mentioned yet was also signaling effect. And that frankly is also the reason why we chose New York City in the end, because we really wanted to establish our base in like a top tier or like tier one tech hub in order to also send a signal to the market. And for us, it was New York City and not San Francisco, ultimately because our European hub is in Berlin, and time zone wise, working between Central Europe and the West Coast is just very, very painful. So to have more overlap for the teams to effectively collaborate, the East Coast in New York City was ultimately the choice. What's important to mention, though, is we actually sold very successfully already into North America while we didn't have a hub on the ground yet. And I would almost differentiate when we think about, or we speak about, going over the pond about 3 dimensions. So like, do we need to localize the product, which in our case, fortunately, we didn't have to do. Do we have to alter our go-to-market strategy, which technically probably always have to do when you enter a new market. And then the third one is, do we actually need an operation on the ground? And we didn't first build the operation on the ground and then started to sell into the market, but we did it the other way around. Like we pretty much hit the ground running once we entered or once we started the US office. So I think that for us was also something that was a very strong recipe for success.
So do you think that for most companies that are planning, I mean, it depends on what you're doing or what you're selling, I suppose, but do you think it's good to actually start off the business almost from outside the US or Canada before you actually leap in? Or do you think just to make sure that the market is there to begin with? Or
I think it very much depends on your business. So maybe to speak about us, we're a software business. So Leapsome is a people enablement software platform. So we sit on top HR information systems and support an intelligent layer that's very much focused on the manager, the end persona, to get to track their goals, to have feedback, to keep learning, to ultimately optimize the organization with intelligent survey data that's very actionable. So these kind of processes, OKRs, performance management, talent management, work the same in India, in London, in the US. So ultimately, that's the first one. We didn't need to localize the product. So while we still had our European hub, we could test the market and actually sell into North America quite successfully already, to basically have a proof of concept and a very clear business case on why we wanted to set up an operation within North America. It's obviously very different if you move to North America to ultimately set up like a technology center to tap into the market there. If you need a lot of localization, a lot of maybe local expertise. But I think if you can sort of like test the market and have proof of concept without doing the big investment first, I think that can be smart choice if it doesn't slow you down.
And when we talk about big investments, obviously expansion, I don't know how many times Sifted have written articles about how expensive it is to actually expand, especially across the pond, because it's a lot of money to set up. But I don't know. I don't know the differences between Canada and the US here, but I'm sure you know. Rick, what would you say?
So one thing that we hear from our clients quite a bit is that, whenever you go expand, that is a big deal, right? You got to be bold, you got to be moving forward. That's why we call it Big Bold Alberta to some degree, as to the reason why people want to come here. Where people benefit from Canada, especially out of Europe, is that we have so many similarities. So things that you need to change for the US, you may not need to change for Canada. Some examples of that is our legal system is very much based on the British system. Is very different from the American system, which is litigation heavy, right? So a lot of our clients prefer to come to Canada first. It's a little bit more business friendly. It's a little bit easier to get started, and it's a little bit therefore lesser cost than trying the US and then going from there. I always say we have similar culture and similar mindset in Canada compared to how Europe thinks and how Europe behaves and how Europe does business. So some of the subtle differences that you get in the US, which is really 50 independent countries, names that call themselves states, that are really different. If you look at California, it's very different from New York. So there's just much more of a similar culture across Canada, Quebec being a little bit different, but that helps you also get scale and get moving and go from there. And that's why we're finding that a lot of companies set up innovation centers here in Alberta as a first step, and then expand into the US. And that seems to be a path that we're seeing a number of large companies, and especially companies from India take over the last couple of months. We've seen emphasis here, we've seen emphasis here. We've seen a number of those companies be here because they can more easily move forward. And then the other thing that people also have to think about is, what's the quality of life you're offering your employees? How safe is the city that you are in? And, you know, are people going to stay? And a lot of the American companies that we work with, even an Irish company that we were doing some work with that started in the US and then consolidated their head offices into Calgary, we're finding it easier to hang on to talent. And that's also of critical importance. So those are some of the considerations that we're seeing, and some of the things that you think about when you think about cost, because employee turnover is expensive. So if you can hang on to our people, which we do very successfully here, that helps as well.
So Saroosh, you obviously have had the company in the US before, since 2015. I mean, how much do you see that kind of the turnover of employees and so on was actually a problem in the US when you were there?
You know, there's a cultural evolution happening, you know, as far as the workforce goes, right? With post-COVID trends sustaining themselves with, you know, hybrid work, remote work. There's a lot of debate going on there. So from our perspective, you know, the paradigm shift is in, I believe, in the company's favor, because while you don't have any geographic boundaries, and when you look at Canada specifically versus the United States in terms of how that you know, evolution towards hybrid and remote has kind of you know, revealed itself in the United States and of course here in Canada, the advantage for us specifically has been I think the talent in Canada. I'm probably going to get beat up for this, but the talent in Canada seems to be a little bit more sustainable. And what I mean by that is, from a cultural perspective, you have folks, and I'm speaking from our personal experience now, you have folks that are looking for a home, a long-term home, where in the United States, we noticed the trend is a little bit more, you know, running 2 jobs, having a side hustle, which is all fine. And more of a short-term type of a engagement with employees. But in Canada, we found the opposite, where the workforce here generally, of course I'm generalizing, we've found to be much more long-term focused. The folks that we've, you know, onboarded and the folks that we're continuing to screen and interview, everyone, you know, generally seems to be looking for, you know, that 5-10 year plus career, and they're looking for, you know, a long-term home. And the other thing I'll mention is, from a cultural diversity perspective, is the talent pool in Canada seemingly is also more educated in many ways, a little bit more sophisticated in terms of the specific skill sets we're looking at, and that might be related to the, you know, the much smaller population that exists in Canada. And so, because you have a smaller population, theoretically you have more competition from our vantage. And so we've kind of been able to play that up as well, where we're actually finding some pretty strong talent that are looking for, long-term positions, growth within an organization rather than skipping around. And that, that's a personal experience that we've had. And that's obviously a plus for us, right?
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, Jenny, you mentioned here that you wanted to expand into one of these kind of top tier hubs, and that had a name for it in some way. And I suppose then in some way that Canada doesn't really have that at the moment. I mean, that kind of maybe because maybe you haven't sold yourself to be that. I mean, I don't know, Rick. I mean, is this a marketing issue for Canada?
Absolutely. We have traditionally drawn most of our investment out of the US. Even today, the US accounts for 56% of our investment, and Europe has been a bit of an afterthought, I think it's fair to say. So over the last 2 years, ever since COVID ended, we've been placing people in the UK, in Ireland, in Germany. We are close to placing people in Spain, Portugal, Italy, and in Paris, because we need to tell the story better. And the interesting piece is when we do get to places like the Milan FinTech Summit or London Tech Week, or when we tour agriculture in Germany, when people hear the Alberta story, they're quite intrigued. And we find in some of the research that we've done that more than 90% of European investors are not aware of the fact what Alberta and Canada in general offer. And then once they find out, there's an incredibly high level of interest. I was in Denmark earlier this year, and we were talking about some green tech, green energy, hydrogen, and that is a core industry for us here in Alberta, and an area where we're really focused on. And we hosted a delegation of 40 people in Edmonton a couple of months ago, and we're now engaged with more than 30 companies. So when people actually get a chance to hear the story and see the story, they're quite intrigued. But we certainly have a bit of work left to do to market. And that's one of the reasons why we do panels like this, just to make people aware.
No, I think it's very interesting. Obviously, I'm Scandinavian, so I was looking at the big scale-ups like Northvolt, and I could see that they probably want to pick Canada because of the kind of green energy available, also being able to actually set up shop very close to a city, so which would be able then to get the talent without having to put them in a small city in Sweden or somewhere else. And obviously, I mean, that's the kind of closeness to life, but also having clean energy that's good for climate tech companies. But I mean, Jenny, you obviously not a climate tech in that way, and you can see differently. I mean, what are your thoughts when you hear this from Rick?
I mean, maybe also just to put sort of like that my previous point into perspective. I don't think there's like absolute top tier or tier one hubs that make sense for everyone. And I think that's a really interesting point, Rick, you made about like the hydrogen or clean tech is maybe like a natural hub for Alberta, for example. And I mean, ultimately, when we did the analysis, like if I was like a medtech or biotech company, we might have chosen Boston. If we would have been a fintech company, we might have chosen like more of the Atlanta or Research Triangle area. So I think it's just a matter, and I think that comes back to the point I think everyone mentioned in the beginning about ecosystems. Like, what is the kind of ecosystems that's like the top tier or one of the top tiers, or brings the qualities you want for your business? And I think also the point about talent, for me, that's not an absolute. I think for me, the question would be, what is the specialized talent that I need to accelerate my business? And for us, we're a B2B software company or SaaS company. And ultimately, what we were looking for is to also tap into a very specialized and mature SaaS talent pool. And this, again, is where, for example, New York City, just given the sort of software startup, scale-up history the city has actually quite interesting talent pool. With that specialization and that maturity, obviously comes more competitiveness. It's harder to attract and then also retain talent. It's something we didn't shy away from. I mean, our business is to really build exceptional organizations, help to build organizations where people are fully aligned, fully enabled, where we help based on data to build exceptional organizations. So we weren't afraid to go into like a competitive market. And I think there's ways to counter that. So I think, again, it's a bit of an optimization function, like what maturity, specialization of talent do you need, what market or signaling or ecosystem access do you need. So I think it's a very personal, ultimately optimization function for every company based on their specific needs.
Okay, yeah. So what has been the challenges then to move? I mean, I think this can actually go for all of you, because it's relocating or, you know, setting up shop in a different country is always a challenge, right? But also going to a completely different time zone is obviously also one. I mean, Jenny, if I start with you, what do you think has been the biggest challenges?
I mean, I think there's always some unknowns, like the things you plan everything, but then there's things you didn't plan for because you didn't know them. So I would say there's always a certain level of more complexity. Certain things take longer, are more expensive. And I think everybody tells you that. And we made like a very detailed plan. We had a launch team that was working on the launch before we launched the office here, and we actually sent 7 people from our Berlin office as the launch team to New York City to set up the operation, to train the local teams, to seed the culture. And despite having this really like maybe very German approach of being very methodological, having a really strong project in place, there's always things you don't know, and some things are more expensive, some things take longer, and yeah, I mean, I think that's just part of the experience.
So what are the things that actually take longer and are more expensive, if you would?
I mean, some of it is big things, some of it is little things, right? For example, I don't know why, but my social security number application in the US was lost twice, and it took me 6 months to get a social security number. I mean, it's, you know, the small things, right? But that's just like one example of that. Hiring for certain roles, then you're hiring in a new market, so maybe you haven't fully figured out how to assess for a right fit. So we went through a couple of like also executive hires that didn't work out in the end, which is always painful, which is always expensive. That's one, and everybody tells you it's going to happen, but you think maybe we can somehow like hack the system and get it right. What are other things? I mean, you're still learning some of the legal, the insurance stuff, need to iterate on that. So I think there's just like a lot of long list of almost like smaller things, but that still obviously generate small frictions, need energy to be taken care of. Yeah, it's just, I mean, I think it's important to plan for that buffer in the time you allocate and the resources you allocate to an expansion project or initiative, in order to be able to buffer that.
Yeah, I think about attracting the right talent and so on, and hiring. I think that's a problem that, I mean, you know, if you just look at the fintech Klarna, when they went to the US, they hired a lot of people that was wrong in the end, because they didn't have this brand when they actually entered the new country. So I suppose that this is always going to be a problem if you don't have a brand. But is that the same issues in Canada? I mean, Neeraj or Saroosh, what do you think? We'll start with you, Neeraj.
So I also invest in multiple startups, and they expand globally. And one thing which I've seen in Alberta and overall Canada as well at large is socially and professionally, you accept it quicker and faster and easier. Like it's one thing, like I have been to Canada now for the last 5 years, and in just first 1 year, everybody started knowing you. Everybody knew that, you know, I was here to set up the company and expand it. So the moment you start doing it, the entire ecosystem starts working with you, you know, and that was very important for me as a founder of the company. But personally as well, I was accepted. My kids were able to get into the community at the community level. So I feel that Alberta has that advantage in terms of the way the entire ecosystem accepts you. And that's where, you know, your branding and everything becomes very fast. Like Saroosh, for that matter, I think he shifted here, 4 or 5 months back, but now everybody knows him. Everybody knows Eventcombo, and we celebrate together. So that's exciting for me. Saroosh, over to you.
Yeah, no, I would definitely echo that, Neeraj. It's what I was saying earlier, right? It's a wonderful large ecosystem that's still very small, right? So we're able to play up advantages of both of those factors, right? So yeah, it's an easier place to signal. I think I heard that term used earlier as well. Signaling is very important, and I think, strategically, geographically speaking, Alberta is a great place to send signals to our markets, right? We're still, primarily revenue driven from the United States. I don't think that's going to change. Obviously, United States is a significantly larger market than Canada, but Canada brings with it its specifically Alberta brings with it its nuanced advantages, right? And it really plays into our favor from all perspectives. Just want to mention something. I think Jenny kind of brought this up. So when you're shifting and all the challenges that come up in Alberta are going to come up in New York. All the challenges that are going to come up in New York are going to come up in Munich and in Paris. And no matter where you are, it's as a CEO, you can pretty much predict all the human resources, market, client, IT. I mean, you name it. You're going to have challenges. Those are all addressable because they're not geographic specific. But the two things I think that are unique are legal and accounting, and that's where we need help. Where as a tech founder, we can pretty much deal with it all. But when it comes to a new province, a new country, getting the right legal support, getting the right accounting support is really important. And while I think everything else is predictable and manageable, I think these two things, you really need strong professional partnerships. And just wanted to mention that that's, in my opinion, the only difference here is you've got to be protected, and you've got to make sound decisions based on good legal representation and good accounting representation. But the rest is it doesn't matter where you are, right?
So how was it then for your team? I mean, did you manage to get a large chunk of them to actually move to Canada from the US, or?
We're geographically distributed, and the plan right now, while we're hiring up here in Alberta, the plan is to relocate our globally distributed team, which is, I think, in about 6 or 7 different countries. And so we're in the middle of being responsible for overpopulating Canada. So we're gonna migrate more immigrants here, and so that's part of our strategy. Number one. Number two, as we continue hiring up here, like I said, we're finding all the advantages that I mentioned earlier to work in our favor. But the plan is to migrate at the moment at about 25-30% of our workforce into Canada, while we run towards our goals of quarterly hiring right here.
So Rick, this sounds like the brain drain for Canada then. You're taking all the great talent across the world to put it in Canada.
Yeah, we've been doing that for a while. Some people don't realize that Calgary actually has the largest US expat population of any city in the world. The US consulate here is huge in terms of the amount of people they support and go from there. British consulate, equally big, and a big presence here. So, and we believe that at the end of the day, this is a war for talent, right? At the end of the day, for companies, this is about how do we get the right people in the right place doing the right thing. COVID helped all of us realize that we could disperse people, but Calgary specifically, but also Edmonton, the rest of the province, Calgary is the best connected mid-city in North America in terms of airline access. So wherever we are a couple hours away from New York or anywhere else. And at the same time, we all just, this is a province that's made up of immigrants, and that creates a whole different atmosphere. I moved here a couple of years ago for this role, and people just welcome you and want you to succeed. So when Saroosh came to town, when Emphasis came to town, when other companies come to town, part of what we do is we connect these CEOs into other CEOs to help them build their ecosystem more quickly. And everyone comments on the fact that people here are just welcoming, because at the end of the day, we've loved oil and gas for many years. It's been very good to us, continues to be very good. But we as a society want to now diversify and evolve. So you've got this group of people that want to drive change, and that goes within government, that goes within the business community, that goes within the people that walk down the street and do jobs. So because everyone's really focused on driving this diversification, we're having a reasonable amount of success moving things forward. We'll go faster, quicker, but we're in a good spot.
So which field, which segment would you say is kind of the best for? Is it climate tech, or is it AI, or software developers, or what do you think?
You can try to be good at everything, you end up being good at nothing. So for Alberta specifically, we focused on 7 sectors to be active in. Our traditional oil and gas sector, especially around LNG, will continue to be of huge importance. We are a agriculture powerhouse, so we export and process a lot of foods. We are certainly looking at fintech. We have a unique ability here from a regulatory front to help people try some things with a light regulatory touch and go from there. So we're seeing a fair amount of interest in that. Clean energy, clean tech, a huge part of the business. We account for 80% of the clean tech investment in Canada currently, just because of our engineering capabilities here. And then logistics and transportation. I think if there's one thing we all learned from COVID, is that you can't build things across the world and then ship them back and forth. So we're a huge beneficiary of friendshoring, nearshoring, onshoring, whatever you'd like to call it. But we're seeing dramatic growth in those areas. And that's because we have a lot of land. So for us, it's relatively easy to build out these huge logistics facilities. And that's why you see companies there. And then the final sector that we're seeing a lot of improvement in is in aviation. And that is because we always have had to transport things all over this province via air transportation, because it's just not the roads. So de Havilland, which is a large manufacturer of water bomber planes, which Europe just bought 50 of because of climate change, is a manufacturer that's relocating from Toronto to here, specifically because we have the talent pool and they can move things forward. So those are our core industries that my team is focused on as we work around the world. We will welcome anybody, so we're not going to say, oh, you're not in our sector, so please don't talk to us, but we try to be really focused.
So if we talk more about not actually the cost of moving to or relocating to the US or Canada, but actually where are the VCs and how easy it is to actually get that VC money depending on where you are. I mean, I don't know, Jenny, Leapsome obviously raised capital. And do you want to be close to the VC community, or how do you feel?
I mean, it's actually we did our round, our Series A round of 60 million in March 2022, when we were still not having our US hub up and running. And it's a bit more of a coincidence that our lead investor, Inside Partners, top tier software investor, actually sits in New York City. It wasn't the reason why we chose New York City, but it's obviously very convenient. We work very, very closely with them. They're actually really helpful in the sense that they have really big kind of consulting expert that we can actively work on go-to-market projects with. So it's very convenient to be close to them. I think if you have a really great business, I think you can get funding no matter where you are. At the same time, being close to an ecosystem obviously comes with certain benefits of being able to easily meet people. You probably, through the ecosystem, have a good community of folks that can maybe then also like introduce you to investors. Always much better to get introduced or found rather than try to cold calling or knocking on investors' doors. So I think that's actually where the Berlin ecosystem connections we've had were really, really helpful in opening doors to US investors. So I think that ecosystem of community access obviously can be helpful to have those easy entries. At the same time, if you have an exceptional, like innovative business where the fundamentals are in place, I think it's always going to be possible.
Yeah, I think every startup founder must believe that their company is exceptional, I suppose, if you're going to manage it all. But I mean, Saroosh, when you moved your headquarters, what did your investors tell you?
It was a interesting set of reactions. Maybe some were, really concerned as to access and stuff. Primarily, our investors are in the Northeast, in the States, New York, New Jersey. So they were surprised. They were like, why Canada and then why Alberta? A couple of them didn't know about Alberta. They're living in the typical American bubble, and so we had to kind of share with them our strategy and everything. But overall, it's been very positive, very, very exciting. I think, again, with the warm welcome that we received here and with our investors observing that, I think that little bit of curiosity was satisfied, right, as to why we did the move and everything. But the overall, significant support. And I think, as I was saying earlier, even with the investor community in Alberta and in Canada, it's thriving. There's a lot of positive growth in that sector, and it doesn't matter, as was said earlier, it doesn't matter where you are. If you have a good, KPIs, if you have good data, large market, you'll attract the right investors. So our existing investors are completely on board. They're enjoying the updates and continuing to support us.
So Neeraj, you obviously had your company and you've been living all over the globe. I mean, how do you compare Canadian VC to the US and in Europe as well?
In Canada, and especially in Alberta, you'll find a lot of family offices. And that's a big support, because when you talk about, Jenny is at Series A level, and there are a lot of companies which are at Series B, C, D. But when you are pre-Series A or C stage, you need that kind of support, and you find a lot of these family offices over here and a lot of angel funds and networks over here. And when you start looking into Series A and B and C, you have a lot of these national funds, as well as a lot of US funds. Like if you even talk about Europe or Asia, you will find a lot of these US funds like Sequoia Capital and Excel Partners being prominent there. And that's a similar pattern over here as well. I was chief strategy officer of a company called Adabotics. It's almost an unicorn. It's called Sunicorns, and we have raised like hundreds of millions of dollars. And a lot of our up to Series A was from family offices and the local investor ecosystem. And then we started going to B and C and D. We have a mix of Canadian investors as well as US investors, but we primarily are a Calgary-based company, and our most important market is US. So I feel that when you are at seed to Series A, the ease at which you can talk to the local investors in Canada is high, and the startups in Canada you'll find are not overly priced, right? And that's very important from investors like us as well. So that's one part of it. But when you start going from Series A beyond, you start interacting with global investors, and US is primarily kind of the most important place where you want to talk to those investors and get the money. So we have that at Adabotics, we got invested by a lot of US investors as well. But there was one important aspect which we found was very important when I was at Adabotics, which was non-dilutive grant. So Canada, if you are in Canada, and you get a lot of non-dilutive support from different agencies, and that's also very significant for a lot of companies. And even if you're at Series B and C and D, there's something called Strategic Innovation Fund, and they gave Adabotics around $35 million US non-dilutive grant, and that was great for us during the pandemic. So I feel it's a mix of everything, but you cannot ignore US investors. But Canada, I feel, is a great place to also raise money if you're a Canadian company.
Yeah, I want to get into those kind of perks that Canada can offer startups. But first, I would like to just be like, well, the VCs obviously there's different price tag on companies depending on where they are. Some European countries have much higher price tags on their companies than in others. And the same in the US seems to be one of the kind of highest priced startup tax, while in Canada maybe a bit cheaper. So how do you do when you actually raise money elsewhere? You come into Canada, will you actually be able to raise the same amounts of money to the higher valuation, or will that be an issue, do you think? I mean, Rick?
No, it is not. The market is pricing correctly, and the reality is, if there was a discount to be up, the issue in Canada, you will find that a lot of the companies we deal with, I spend a lot of time in New York and San Fran, in talking to the VC community, and they see that the biggest growth they're seeing is actually in Canada. So they fully understand the market. I was just meeting with the largest private equity firm in the world, and they just did a $335 million investment here, and they ran their numbers, and they certainly paid a fair price. And so there's no worry of a potentially discount there. What they find is that, again, the point that Neeraj was making a little bit earlier, because Alberta is so close to the US, we are, only 2 hours away from San Fran by plane. We're 3 hours away from New York. We are positioned in a place where it's easy for them to get to us and to figure out what's going on, and it's a really transparent market. So they're actually finding, from a due diligence perspective, they can go faster here and do things more quickly, which again is a benefit.
Yeah, sure. So Neeraj spoke about the grants and the kind of support system in Alberta. I mean, how does that differ, do you think, from the US, Rick?
We're a copy and paste kind of place, I'll call it, on the incentive space. So there's a great number of programs that the federal government runs, whether it's the Strategic Innovation Fund that was mentioned, or whether it's SHRED credits, which especially help companies when they're in the research phase pay for some of that research. Well, there's an extensive number of programs available, and then the provinces come in and combine that with, I think, the other major benefits, which are the major educational systems that we have, or schools. We have 28 post-secondary education institutions here in Alberta, and we develop and create a lot of technology, machine learning, great work done by Dr. Richard Sutton out of the University of Alberta. Calgary has a quantum technology center that the government just poured a whole number of money in. So most of the work that's done at the provincial level is about helping build the ecosystem. Most of the work that's done at the federal level is about funding and helping businesses move forward. So each province and the country in general do a great job of moving that forward. And one of the benefits that we have in Alberta that people sometimes don't realize is our government runs huge surpluses. So we're not a deficit running government. And so the government can invest. And so it continues to invest significantly into infrastructure, because it recognizes that this transition that we're making, that is changing the Alberta economy, requires deep investment from the government. So we have a heritage fund that we're building up with oil revenues, much like Norway does. And our intent is to just keep investing, because we believe long-term that will be the benefit that will help companies. And then the final point I'll make is, from a tax perspective, Alberta runs some of the lowest tax systems in the world. So when companies come in here, they can access or they can generate profits more quickly to reinvest into their business. And for startups, that's pretty important as well. We don't have some of the health taxes and other taxes that other places have. And then, of course, the final point that I keep mentioning, and I forgot to mention earlier, I can't believe it took me 48 minutes to get there, is we have a healthcare system much like Europe. So our employees here are protected in what they can move forward with. Does that answer your question, Mimi? Yeah,
no, great. But as part of the European healthcare system, I don't know if that's fantastic right now, but it's good to know they probably have better healthcare than we do.
And better than the US by a long degree, right, in terms of access.
So, I mean, Jenny, I mean, what is the next step for you? Do you think that you will actually, I mean, you just arrived more or less in the US. Will you try to ramp up that kind of the office there? Are you seeing in the future that you will actually open up more offices in the US, or do you think that you are happiest with one?
I mean, for us, and this was my point I made in the beginning about, I think for me, there's two different points as to where do you set up your operation and what markets you sell into, right? So you could have your office set up in Canada, but service the entire North American market. And I actually think the market is probably more determining of the valuation than where your hub is. So I think this was a point I actually wanted to surface earlier, but didn't want to interrupt you. For me, I mean, definitely our only North American hub, because we can actually service all of North America and potentially the Americas to some extent out of this hub. The same way out of our Berlin hub, we actually servicing EMEA very effectively, and actually right now also some of our customers in Asia Pacific. So for me, and again, that depends on your business model, right? For some people, they actually need different like locations across the continent. For us, it's a software business where we deliver our product versus via the internet. We do the majority of our sales interactions and also customer interactions via Zoom. That's not the limiting factor. And ultimately, I think what right now we have a strategy to have a hybrid office. So everybody actually needs to be in a certain proximity to New York City, because we're still seeding our culture here. We're still setting up the operations or scaling the operations. What we might want to consider at some stage is to tap into further talent pools in North America beyond the proximity of New York City. And that might be like a talent strategy that we could consider. But if we stay in a hybrid model, we can service North America very effectively out of New York.
And how is it with the culture change? Because obviously a German company going to the US, how have you managed that? Or is it that different, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. About 50% of our team in Berlin is international. So we've always had a very, we've always been an English first company. So we've always had a very sort of like diverse, internationally focused company while we're rooted in Germany, right? So there's obviously certain effects that has had on our culture. And I think it's the fine line. So we basically want to have a unified global core in our culture. And this is why we intentionally said it's expensive, but we're sending 7 people from the Berlin office into the New York City office to seed our culture and set up the operation. We do also know why we want to have a certain cultural core, that there's also always going to be differences within the culture in certain global hubs. And that's also fine, right? I think one should embrace that. It's also like our US operation influencing our culture back in Germany. It's something that evolves while the core stays the same. And for us, by bringing the launch team, by having one of the 2 founders and CEOs in both of the global hubs, that actually works quite well.
Yeah. I think that's the cultural, I think that's one of the kind of the key problems sometimes as well. If you don't actually have the launch team, you go over there and you're like, how will we work in this new environment? And so that's great. I mean, I don't know, we got one question through, and that was more about,
I think Neeraj also had a point on that, I think, because he unmuted himself.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, especially, thanks, Jenny, especially regarding the business culture. What we are seeing, especially from European and Asian companies, are that they want to be successful in North America and US. I and Rick and a couple of us had gone to Israel couple of months back, and then we signed one MOU between Israel and Alberta for Technology Center of Excellence. The idea was ecosystem to ecosystem mapping, and we found one common kind of a messaging, which is we want to be successful in US, we want to be successful in North America, but they wanted to come to Canada, understand the business culture, and tap the market, and then also tap US. So Canada is also becoming a good conduit to be part of US. So a lot of companies, especially European companies, we are seeing they're coming over here. They are able to access the market, access sometimes funding, and understand the business culture. And then they slowly start also tapping US while they are in Canada. So that's very interesting. And what Jenny mentioned, understanding the business culture is very important. And it doesn't happen in a day. Even if you have clients in US and you are not in US, you still have to understand the business culture. And that only happens when you are here. And that's why we keep saying that come to Alberta and try and understand business culture, integrate yourself. And when you go to US and tap the market, it's easy. Like they don't say, oh, you are coming from other country. Canada and US are very good business allies. And that's what I've seen look at Adabotics. I told you it's a robotics company in supply chain, and we were never asked the question that, oh, you are based out of Calgary and you're serving a US market. It was never the case. Like, we were part of that ecosystem.
That's great. And with that, I think it was a great way to end this Sifted Talks. So thank you for all the panel and the audience for coming. And we have spoken about, obviously, Canada a lot and how it differs from the US and what to look out for and what to think about before you actually take that leap. And it would be great to actually follow how many European companies now will actually switch from having their headquarters in Europe and let's go to Canada instead, because it sounds great. But thank you so much. And thank you for your insights, and to the partner Invest Alberta for the support. And I hope to see you all for our next Sifted Talks on November 16th on redefining growth, the evolution of a startup CFO. So you can look at sifted.eu/talks for more information about that talk and others coming up. Thank you so much for joining me today.